slides, I'm going to go through things fairly quickly. My focus is going to be kind of explaining the three models of employee ownership that are going to be presented here by the other three speakers, giving you a little bit of information and then giving you information about the research that has been done on this particular topic. So in terms of employee ownership, okay, what are the models of employee ownership? You will see three different, if I can get it to work, three different kinds of models. ESOPs is one we're going to talk about today. Employee Stock Ownership Program is what that stands for. Employee Ownership Trust is the next one. And then worker cooperatives. These are three primary, even though within each one, there's kind of different nuances to the different models, but these are the three primary ones. With an ESOP, you can think about an ESOP as indirect ownership. There are stocks that the trust holds, and the employees hold the stocks. So employees have an indirect ownership. You will see a trustee-led decision-making. So especially in the first two models, when we're both employees and we're owners, the typical management levels of the organization still exist. So I can be an owner and I'm working on the line, but I'm an employee owner. I'm not telling everybody else what to do. You still have your typical management structures. So trustees, a board, is essentially who the CEO has to report to for the decision making. It is a profit sharing. So at the end of the year, the value of your stock may go up, plus profits get moved into it. You have individual shares. There's different formulas for how those shares are given to employees, but there's individual shares. And this is typically, you're going to have medium to large organizations that are in this range. There's a little under 7,000 ESOPs in the United States. This is the largest or the greatest number of in terms of employee ownership. Now, employee-owned trust, that is abbreviated EOTs, so you may see it as an EOT. It too has indirect ownership. This one I'm not as familiar with. I'm counting on Kevin here today to help give more information about what really an employee-owned trust, but at a high level, again, it's indirect ownership. It is also trustee-led decision-making, but while with an ESOP, all your shares are held in trust, with the employee ownership trust, your business assets are held in trust. So it's a little bit different. There's also the profit sharing, no individual shares, and more small to medium-sized businesses, and I think you'll see that with the conversation today. And then there's worker cooperatives. Now, with worker cooperatives, again, we're going to be depending upon our presenters today. It's direct and equal ownership, and it's more of a democratic decision-making body when you have a worker cooperative. There's profit sharing, membership has shares, and it's small to startup kind of businesses. There's somewhere around 10,000 or 1,000 worker cooperatives in the United States employing about 10,000 people, which means these are fairly small. So you're looking at somewhere around 10 to 15 in size, even though I did meet a person at a conference who their worker cooperative had 2,500 people employed inside that worker cooperative. So it can certainly range in size. So what is the research surrounding? This is going to be primarily ESOPs, but the leader in employee ownership research is Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing. They have been the leaders in the work that has been done on employee ownership. You can find a lot from the Institute website and learn more there, plus all the research that comes out from their fellows that is published in journals on the topic. Most of the research is focused on ESOPs. Um, and that is just because there's a much larger body that's there, and because there's a lot of standard data that is collected by ESOPs that's available for us to study. Because I am focusing mostly on ESOPs, some of these things may not be generalizable to all of the models that are out there, but I'm hoping that Kevin and Nadiv can speak to it a little bit, some of the ideas that are shared here. Employee ownership does have a positive impact on wealth. ESOP participants have double the retirement wealth of a non-ESOP participant. So they retire richer. Okay, the data has clearly shown that. Employees report that wages are equal to or higher than market wages for their job. So although they're getting profit sharing, they aren't getting their wages cut because of that profit sharing. Fewer workplace safety incidents are seen inside these ESOPs. So there'll be a 9 to 13% decrease in safety incidents when a company has moved to an ESOP. They do provide competitive benefits in addition to the ESOP. Typically, your ESOP shares you get at retirement, but they may also have a 401. They have health care. They have a lot of different benefits that go with it beyond just the shares that you get as being an employee owner. There was research done that tracked individuals from birth to 28 to 34 years of age, and that's very important for the students that are sitting here because this is what they found. People between 28 and 34 who were working for ESOPs had higher wages. They had already accumulated more household wealth. They had better health care, education, and other benefits. So there's clear reasons why you may want to consider looking for an ESOP or an employee-owned company at the time of your graduation. There's clear financial benefits. Now, there's also a positive impact on workplace culture that has been identified. Typically, ESOPs provide more workplace training. 70% of the ESOPs provide it compared to 44% of non-ESOPs. There's more involvement teams, at 38% to 27%. So you can think about this as if there is a group of people working on the line, that group of people as an involvement team may get together to try to figure out how to make that line be more productive. So that may be part of what they're doing, but they're trying to solve specific problems within the business. They see that cooperation among the employees is much higher in an ESOP. Job security, that's a big one. In 2022, 0% of ESOP workers were laid off versus 7% of non-ESOP workers. I recently spoke to an owner of an ESOP, and when companies were struggling to keep employees and to get work done during the pandemic, they didn't lay off anybody, and they were actually able to increase productivity. It's amazing what these ESOPs have done. There's also a decrease in voluntary turnover. Turnover is costly. When you lose an employee, it represents about 18 months of wages in order to get that person hired and get them up to speed. So you don't want to lose your employees. Voluntary turnover goes down. And overall, they see a 20% increase in labor productivity as compared to non-ESOP companies. So all very positive results. Now, why is it important right now? Why is this a timely topic? There is a silver tsunami out there. A lot of people with gray hair just like me. There are over 12 million privately owned businesses in the United States today. that are held by baby boomers getting ready to retire. So 7 out of 10 business owners expect to retire in the next 10 years. 12 million, I indicated, are held by baby boomers. So they're looking to retire. Only 2 or 3 of those will, out of 10, will actually be able to find a buyer. So if they can't find a buyer, they may continue on for the business, but at some point that business closes shop. Now, businesses across in the state of Iowa, a little under 50% of the people who are employed in the state of Iowa are employed by privately owned firms. Okay, not those that are publicly traded on Wall Street. They're working for privately owned firms. So when we talk about the impact on the state of Iowa or small communities, this can be huge to lose these businesses. And that's why employee ownership is a model that's important for us to be looking at right now. If they do buy, what often happens? Assets are merged, they close the facilities, it's a negative impact on the communities, the business is no longer there. So that very frequently happens. So what's the ESOP potential out there? Again, I indicated that it was larger companies. Right now in the United States, it appears that there's about 137,000 businesses that are in that important range for ESOPs. They currently employ 33 million people. Now, is that a big number? Is that a small number? That is 20% of our working workforce today is employed in these businesses. Okay, so that's why this is very important today. We want to keep these businesses in their communities and keep the people in the communities employed. They represent $14.7 trillion in assets and $2.4 trillion in payroll. So you can see that this is a huge financial impact in the United States, and especially in the Midwest states where a lot of these businesses are in rural areas. I spoke with an alum who converted his business into an ESOP. And in that headquarters, he employed about 50 people. There's only 5,000 people in the entire town. Less than half of that are going to be working. So that losing that company can have a huge negative impact on that town of 5,000 people. And that's what a lot of Iowa looks like. So that's why this particular topic becomes so important. So what's holding people back? Number one, lack of awareness. That's part of why we're here, to raise awareness. Lack of clarity about the Department of Labor enforcement regarding valuations. The company has to be valued every year so you know how much the stock is worth. There's a little bit of some gray area there about what happens. Inability of retiring owners to borrow sufficient funds. Without help from the state, that may be more difficult for them to do, but this can be a barrier. Lack of recognition that even a small percentage of ESOPs lead to very large wealth accumulations. They can have big positive impacts. Now here, how can Iowans learn more? UNI is home to the Iowa Center for Employee Ownership. The purpose of that center is to raise awareness of the ideas or behind the employee ownership concepts. They are trying very hard to meet with business owners who are what we call ESOPable, or companies that might be more appropriate for an employee-owned trust, or companies, smaller companies that could be converted to a worker cooperative. That is their purpose. Now, coming up on the 23rd of October is a conference held in Ankeny, and for the students in the room today, there may be some student scholarships still available for that. So if you have an interest in attending, send me an email and let me know so that you can go. You can talk to other businesses that are ESOP companies. There may be worker cooperatives there. There may be an employee-owned trust there, but it's an opportunity to learn more. So with that, I think now we were going to take one question. If there's anybody out there who has a question that they would like to ask at this time, you can go ahead and put it into the Q&A section and I'll be happy to answer it.
Attendees who are out there, you have the option of writing your question in that Q&A. Can you access that? Can you see that? All right, I do have a quick question for you, Leslie, that
Okay, we have some
oh,
coming
you have
in,
a
and I'm going
question?
to
All right, wonderful.
take the
Let's do
first
that.
one from Isabel. It is a great question. And the question is, how long does it take to set up an ESOP? And I'm going to say that depends. It really depends. One of the company I was talking to you about where they had just, it was an alum who converted to the ESOP. It only took about a year to secure the funding and to get things set up. But for other businesses, it could take longer to do that. And the Iowa Center for Employee Ownership can be very helpful in providing direction and contacts because there are people out there. There are firms to help people go through the conversion process. And the state has money in order to help people go through that conversion process because there is a cost to it. So it's a great question, but it depends. It depends. So thanks, Isabel. There's other questions that are in there and that at the end, we'll come back to some of these questions. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Leslie, for this insightful um, presentation. And again, as Leslie mentioned, please hold those and we will hold the questions and we will come back at the end. So our next speaker is Heather Cody, and I will let her start her presentation or talk. You need to
Yep, unmute. I should have known that since COVID, that you have to unmute yourself. Well, thank you for having me here. I love talking about ESOPs. I have been with my company for 22 years. So I work for Engineered Seal Products. We were actually founded in 1969. We are 100% employee owned in Cedar Rapids, Iowa is where we're headquartered. We are a distributor and now I can say a manufacturer. We just opened a manufacturing factory in India of seals and rubber products. So O-ring seals, gaskets, custom molded rubber. Probably everyone sitting on here has a water bottle next to them that has a seal in it. That's what we do. We service the really large equipment manufacturers like your John Deere's, Polaris, Articats. We're in industries like oil and gas, ag, construction, mining, aerospace, food and beverage. We have roughly about 350 employees now. We have 12 physical locations. We're in 3 countries, so US, China, and India. And we are now in 11 states here in the US. Just for a little bit of perspective on how much growth we've had, I started with ESP in 2003, and we had 1 location in Cedar Rapids with roughly 50 employees. So growth has been our strategy, and being an ESOP has definitely made that possible. To give you a little bit of history on our ESOP, our current president and CEO started with ESP in 1994. and he purchased ESP in 1995. And prior to coming to ESP, he was a partner at RSM McGladrey, and he worked with a number of ESOP companies as a partner. And he loved the idea of employee ownership. One of the things he noticed that those companies almost always outperformed non-ESOP companies. And so that was one of the first things he did when he took over this company, is that he established what was called a minority owned ESOP. And really what that means is that all employees still got to participate in the ESOP, but they own less than 50% of the shares. And so Jeff still owned over 50% of the shares of the company. And that actually, we were a minority ESOP from 99 until we went 100% in 2012. Our percentage just kept growing year after year. In 1999, when we established the ESOP, we talked more about how it creates this culture of ownership, but we really didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about employee ownership, because it was, I always say we hire really smart people. And, as we continue to talk about like owning your position and making it more efficient and grow, at the end of the day, we all knew that the person who was getting majority of the upside of that growth was our, one person. It was our CEO. And so we didn't really talk about it, although even back then, it's a really great benefit. Even as a minority owned ESOP, it's a huge benefit to employees. I always say though, when I started in 2003, I was 22 years old. I had no idea what an ESOP was. I really thought it was a short-term gig until I finished my degree and I'd be out. And I just celebrated 22 years here. And I will tell you, I have a son, a junior in business economics, actually, and I've already sent him all of the ESOP companies, and that's where you're going to get your internship. So it's near and dear to my heart. I absolutely love ESOPs. So in 2008, I think is when I really fell in love with ESOPs and the culture and what it really does to create this sense of ownership, the sense of it's no longer the company's money or somebody else getting rich, it's our money. And in 2008 and 2009 was a couple of really bad years for the US, or actually the world. A lot of companies were closing their doors. A lot of people were laying off. We were not. And we had employees who were working on the front lines who would come into my office. I had transitioned over to HR at that point. And every month we have what's called Team ESP. So we have a completely open book management style where our CEO gets in front of the entire company on a monthly basis. We still do this every month. Actually, it was today. And we go over the prior month's financial, like how we performed financially. So everybody knows how we're performing to budget, how we're performing to last year. Are we hitting our metrics? Are we not? Are we getting a bonus? Are we not? We go over all of that on a monthly basis. But before that, we always have a meal. And I had a couple employees come up to me and say, why are we spending money on a meal? Like, let's potluck it. And so for almost a year, we potlucked it. And yeah, it only saved probably about $500 a month, but it was still $500 a month. And I thought, this is really cool. It's no longer the CEO's money or Jeff's money. It is our money and our future. And so I think that's the first time I was like, this is where I will be for the rest of my career, is at an ESOP company at ESP, actually. 2012, we went 100% employee owned. And I think that's when our culture really changed, just because we got to talk about it a lot more. As a 100% employee owned company, we got to, everything we did, our signage, everything was 100% employee owned. And so we created a grassroots ownership committee who was started by all non-managers. And they really went out and told the story of ESOPs and what it means to be an ESOP. And we went through the summary plan descriptions, and so people were very educated in what an ESOP was. We hired an outside board because we were now 100% employee owned. We put in programs like Fix What Bugs You. And so every month you're required to come up with 2 things that that just bug you, and then fix them because you own it and it's your job and it's your company. So if it's something that maybe takes you 10 minutes every day and it's so annoying and you could just fix it one time and it's now 1 minute, then do it. And so we had that program. Um, Leslie mentioned the retirement silver tsunami. Since we went 100% employee owned, people want to sell to an employee owned company, and so we've actually purchased 6 companies since 2012. So that's where a lot of our growth has come from. There's a ton of different examples I can give you of why I love ESOPs. And maybe we can, in the question and answer, we can go over some of those, but it's really neat. And I will say, if my understanding is there's a lot of students on here, I would find an ESOP company if you can. There are tons in the core or in the Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, Cedar Falls area. And so if you ever have any questions, I know my contact information is out there. I'd love to talk to anybody about ESOPs.
One of the questions that are already in here, Heather, that I think maybe you could answer is that do you see any significant drawbacks to running an ESOP versus a normal company or corporation? Is there something that's more complicated for you versus a publicly traded firm, let's say?
I cannot think of something that is more complicated. From an administrative standpoint, obviously there's more that you have to do when it comes, a lot of companies just have a 401k. We have a 401k and a 401k match. And then we have to do like the evaluation every year. A third party comes in, but I would say from a regular employee outside of HR or accounting, really there's no extra work. And I would say there's no negative downfall. It really, what I like to say is an ESOP really is a wealth building tool for people who may have never been given that chance to be an owner, or even like myself, I think I'm a bit risk adverse and I would never have, I don't think I would be risky enough to go out and purchase a company. And it's kind of neat because I get a lot of that same return, but I don't have to risk my own money. 0 cents of mine have actually went into my ESOP balance. It's really sweat equity is what we like to say, is what funds that.
All right, then
Thank
I
you,
think
Heather.
we can come back to the other questions. This is just one quick question and one quick answer. So our next speaker is Kevin Clegg. Go ahead, Kevin, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm going to tell a few stories along kind of sharing the journey of employee ownership and little bits and pieces of the ownership mindset as well. My experience with really starts in between my undergrad and grad school. I had just finished my undergrad and I had a plan to go to grad school and I applied and the letter came in the mail. I was super excited. I ripped it open and then I read the words that said, "You're a great candidate, but there was lots of great candidates and unfortunately you did not get accepted this year, but try again next year." And I'm like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." Like this was my hopes, my dreams, like my everything, like now what, right? So super frustrated. And I had been working full time while going to school full time, happened to run the counter of an auto repair shop. And my brother and I got to talking and said, "Look, I'm graduated. I got more time on my hands now. Like, what if we opened a shop together and did our own thing?" And so that's what we did. So we in 1998 we opened up an auto repair shop in a sister city and within just opened it from scratch. We didn't take over an existing business, just found a location and purchased all the equipment, set it up, hired people, the whole 9 yards, and within 3 or 4 months, we were profitable and things were going well. That what was a bad experience, or what I thought was a terrible thing, and I had no future, no career, no opportunities. All those experiences of starting and running a company were incredible. And when I applied to grad school the next year, I got in, and they specifically said those experiences that you got in this last year are exactly what we were hoping people would go do, is to get more real life experiences and running businesses and so forth. And those experiences were a catalyst through for the rest of my career for sure. So I got accepted into a master's program in organizational behavior, and I studied org design and org theory and a lot of different components of teams and team behavior and things like that. And one of the things that I learned there that it's super applicable, that comes up later throughout all my career, and applies to employee ownership as well. And it's kind of like the base theory of organizations are that there's a theory that essentially says every organization is perfectly designed to deliver the results that they get. And if you think about it, it's so true. And I could even argue that in our own personal lives, they're perfectly designed to deliver the results that they get. And if we don't like what we're seeing, we need to go back, analyze, make changes, and look at the results that we get and keep doing that process. And I've used that process my entire career with organizations. When I graduated, I didn't go back to the business that I started with my brother. I went into the corporate world and worked with large Fortune 500 companies in HR leadership and strategy roles for a little over a decade. And I saw firsthand those principles of what are we getting as a company, what do we say we want as a company, and what do we need to change or tweak in order to get better results. On that journey, probably I think it was in 2011, my brother approached me and said, "Would you ever consider coming back? I know you've got a successful career. You may not even be interested at all, but would you ever come back and maybe take all these lessons of large companies and the things you've learned and see what we could do in the small business world?" And I was excited to consider that. I wasn't sure I was going to do it. And but the more I thought about it, the more I was intrigued by this idea of I've learned all these concepts that big businesses use, and I've worked in small businesses. Like what carries over? What could this look like? And decided to make the move with one condition. I told him if I come and join you again, then whatever we build up, we're going to be working with lots of different people. We're going to grow the business. As we grow with them, we have to sell to employees when we exit. I'm not going to just sell to the highest bidder. I've seen too many mergers, acquisitions, buy sells inside the business world, and it seems too often that it's the employees and the customers that get the short end of the stick when transactions take place. And I want to make sure that we're taking care of the people that build with us. And he said, "That sounds great. Let's do it." And we didn't really talk about it again, and we started running the business and acquiring companies and growing. And fast forward to 2020, and we had three automotive and general service repair businesses, a body shop, and then an independent sales dealership. And things were going well. And 2020 wasn't a bad year; it was a great year. We even grew more. But during the midst of that, I started thinking about these ideas of organizations being perfectly designed to deliver the results they get. And we were super employee friendly in all of our processes, but like I wasn't seeing ownership mindset from everybody. And I thought, like, what if employee ownership was a operating model, not an exit strategy? What could we do if we sold now to employees, and what would happen, and what sort of results would we get if everybody was a fully vested owner in the company? And the more we talked about it, the more my brother was open to doing it, and we're the majority shareholders in the company. And so we decided to make the transition. Naively, I talked to the employees within a couple months of that and said, "All right, we've decided we're going to do this, and I'm sure it's going to take me, I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 months to figure this out, but we're gonna go employee owned." And I didn't even know what that meant at the time, and should never have made a commitment that we're going to do something in that short of time frame. So we first explored ESOPs. It's the most common model, has been talked about in the US, and excited about it because there's some really cool perks. When you sell into an ESOP, there's a significant tax savings for the owners that sell into it. And then you can also grow tax free inside of an ESOP. And so that was super enticing. And we dove into it, explored the cost to set one up and everything else. And I was a little surprised to see how expensive it was to set up. There's the annual costs of setting it up initially, and then also the annual costs of valuations of the company and so forth were fairly expensive for a smaller company. We're 50-ish employees at the time. And then the biggest gotcha though was if inside of an ESOP, because it's ERISA governed, if you receive an offer for your company, that's in excess of its value, it can be deemed in the benefits of employees, and you would have to sell the company. And where we're trying to set up this legacy of employee ownership and perpetuity, the last thing we ever wanted to have happen was for the company ever to be sold under any circumstances and not stay in the hands of employees forever. And so that was a big enough drawback. We decided that we need to go back to the drawing board and consider other options. So at that point in time, we looked heavily at doing a worker cooperative. And I really love the idea of one person, one vote that comes with a worker cooperative, and this idea again of true buy-in from each person. But in talking to lots of different people, they expressed how difficult it is to get everybody onto that kind of wavelength. And if you give somebody the vote when they don't have maybe the understanding of how a business runs and operates, or maybe can easily be influenced by other people, that it might be a power that's a little more than some people would be able to utilize comfortably, and making the best decisions. Because if you think about it, when you're inside of a company and it's shared ownership, you're not just making the decisions that's best for yourself, you're also making decisions that's best for others that you're working with. And if you're not willing to think about self and others as you make decisions, sometimes bad decisions get made. And so we looked at a worker cooperative as almost like the ideal model and something to work towards. But we wanted to see that we could teach and meet people where they're at. If people weren't even used to employee ownership and they don't understand these principles, perhaps we need to use a different model until we could get to a place where that might be something that we could consider. So with that in mind, we uh, kept exploring and looked at employee ownership trusts. And in the U.S., honestly, it was super difficult to find anybody who had actually gone through one. There was only a handful at the time. This was back in 2021-ish when we were doing all the research, and we ended up finding lots of examples from the UK and from Europe, and we really loved the things that we are hearing. And as we were considering that as the option that we would go forward with, we were connected to a group called Common Trust, and they had done some conversions with companies in Europe and then also in the US. And they used a specific model called a perpetual purpose trust. And when we found out about that form of an employee ownership trust, we felt like it was the perfect fit. And to talk a little bit structurally about what it is, it's instead of any employees owning shares, like in an ESOP, the trust might hold the shares, but they're allocated to individual employees. In the case of a perpetual purpose trust, the shares are all held by the trust in perpetuity, and no employees have any rights to any of those shares. And instead, you set up the purposes of the trust, and those purposes have to be followed by the companies that are owned by the trust. And so you can set up, there's an extreme amount of customization that's available for people that operate trusts. And so we determined what our purposes were, and they were things like, we want this to be employee owned, in the sense that all of the profits will be shared with employees. Everybody can participate in that profit sharing. We want to make sure that we maintain high levels of customer service. We want to make sure that we give back to the communities in which we do business in. We want to make sure that there's access for training for all employees. We set up like a number of different purposes that have to be followed. And then from a governance standpoint, there's a trust stewardship committee, and that committee is made up of employee representation. It can have outside representation and others. And so we started with a 3-person committee, and we're working towards a 5-person committee over time. And that group is responsible for interfacing with each of the businesses and understanding how they're living up to the purposes. If the businesses don't live up to the purposes, then we have the right as a trust stewardship committee to enact changes on the boards of the individual companies, and in order to ensure that those purposes are upheld. And then there's a separate check and balance inside of the perpetual purpose trusts, that you can have a trust enforcer, and that trust enforcer is authorized to kind of be a third party, that if for some reason the trust purposes weren't being upheld, then they can be kind of a broker change. They'll reach out to the trust stewardship committee and say, hey, we understand that there's some question as to whether these purposes are being held. You need, like, what's going on, and if the trust stewardship committee for whatever reason wasn't following those purposes, then they could be removed and new trust stewardship committee members put in place. And so you really have the ability to keep it evergreen under that structure. And so all these components working together was a really good fit for us. And we ended up making that transition in the summer of 2022. So it was about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
We thought that for sure that was going to be the hardest part, was getting through the research for a couple of years and then getting our trust formed and getting all the owners to agree, and that transaction we really celebrated getting to that place. But the reality was that was just the beginning of the hard work, because just because you're employee owned doesn't mean you've changed all the mindsets. We saw incredible results in our first full year in business, in the operating in the trust with employee ownership. We went from a little over $500,000 in profits to $1.3 million in profits, and we shared the year prior to being employee owned, there was $35,000 that was shared with employees through a profit sharing program. But as employee owners in the new structure, we shared $474,000 of profit with employees. So you can imagine, if you're a frontline employee and you had very little, and now under employee ownership, you were getting 15% plus of your total salary in profit sharing bonuses. It's a huge win, because they were already paid. We were already paying above market wage for all of the positions in the company. So there was a lot of excitement and energy that whole year as we shared on a quarterly basis. But still, like, the gap of the ownership mindset was evident. And so we set about looking to see what can we do about this. And this is like maybe introducing another thing that was heavily on my mind and had been my whole working career. The Gallup studies, and this is as of, I think, even this year, when they research and look into employee engagement across the world, it's currently you've got about almost 80% of the workforce of the world is disengaged. And that's just absolutely frightening, and something that we should all be frustrated with. But we can see it, like, like, customer service seems to be a surprise when you receive it, good customer service, and it shouldn't be. It should be that we're in jobs that we love, that we're connected to, and in doing good, and yet that's not the case. And so I would argue that the world's organizations, 80% plus of them, are perfectly designed to create disengaged workforce. And so we've got to do something different about it. And I would strongly argue that a well-run, employee-owned company is a huge solution to that problem. What we did as a company over the last 2.5 years is set about to create a program to help create some of that employee ownership mindset. And what we decided out of the gate was we need to figure out first how to help people understand the concept of owning their lives. And if we can help people understand what that means, then we can get them thinking about owning their careers. And if we can help them with owning their careers, then they could be in a position to be an owner in a company. And so that's what we started at, and designing a training for it. And we worked with a gentleman who had actually worked for Gallup for I think a decade plus, and then another instructional designer, and the three of us met and talked and interacted and came up with the program where we really got people focused on thinking about, what do I care about most? And as I contemplate what I care about most, and I identify something I want to put more energy to that I do care about, and I consciously choose to do that, that's owning my life. And we invited our entire workforce to go through that process. And from there, we then took them to the next course that said, now that you are aware of things that you care about in your life, no judgment, whatever it is, and you're choosing consciously to do something about it, how is your career associated with the things that you care about most? And is it helping you? Is it holding you back? And as you look at life events that are happening to you, is this career the career that you want to be in, and are you committed to it? And as they finished that process, then we said, look, you've got a choice to make. You're in the right company, in the right job, and there's connection between career and what you care about most. And if so, great. But if not, then let's do something about it.
I
And
think you've provided some really good things for the students in the room to be thinking about as they go through their process. We need to move on to the worker cooperatives, give Navad
Okay.
a little bit of time to
Great.
talk. If somebody does have a final question that we could ask, um, oh, how is it an employee-owned trust label as employee ownership when employees don't actually own any of the shares of the company? Can you answer that question, Kevin?
Yeah, it's more what the word that we use on a regular basis is stewardship. And so it's more of a steward owner than a traditional owner of the shares, as we're all looking at these shares being held by the trust on our behalf, not just for us, but for future generations as well. And so we want to do the best that we can to ensure that these jobs remain in the future for other employees and that these services remain for the public as well. So it's more of a steward owner than the traditional form of ownership of it's my shares and they'll be bought and sold. So that's the big difference.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, now we're going to learn about the third model, which is worker cooperatives. Welcome.
All right, thanks so much, Dean Wilson. And thanks so much, Dr. Shahina and Kevin, Heather. Just a joy to join you guys today from Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech University. Tell you guys a little bit about worker cooperatives and my experience with them, specifically in Iowa. But before I can talk about that, I want to give you guys a little bit of the backstory about my experience as an entrepreneur and a business person, because that'll kind of set the table for where we want to go here. So I had an IT business not long after I finished my MBA, and I did very well with that. And that really led to my first coffee business because I wanted to get out and meet people. I kind of learned that I was a social person, that I needed to get out. So we started a coffee business in Gainesville, Florida in 2011. And about a year and a half later, my wife finished her graduate degree and kind of started her academic journey. And that forced the issue that we needed to sell our business. So at that time, we sold our coffee business. It was a small roastery. We did a lot of wholesale roasting, selling to grocery stores, selling coffee at a farmer's market. And we did really well. This was a big financial win, to go from zero to hero in that entrepreneurship business sale kind of way. So I had this experience selling a business in kind of the traditional format, the traditional way, selling it to another family. After that, I couldn't really stay away from the coffee business. So we moved to downtown Phoenix, Arizona, and my wife had a postdoctoral fellowship there, and I started another roastery with everything that I learned. And then she got her tenure track job at Iowa State. So we moved to Ames, Iowa, and we said at that point, we're ready to open the full coffee shop and coffee roastery. So we bought a historic building on Main Street in Ames, and this is about 2015. And we did a full build out, and the business was going great, and it was fantastic. So at some point, one of the employees, this was around the time of COVID, one of our key employees, who were all baristas, by the way. So it was really me roasting, running the shop, doing all the administrative work. And I had hired a bunch of part-time baristas to help me run the coffee shop part of it. So one of these employees, came to me and said, we really want to unionize. Several of us in the shop, wouldn't it be cool if we could have a union? And my response right away was to say, I would love a union, but do I get to be in it too? I don't want to be left out. It would be so much fun to be in the union with you guys. And that really led to conversations to say, unions are very combative. They're combative by design, right? And ways that we could do that same idea, but actually give ownership to the employees in some ways. So this led to a lot of discussion, a lot of thought, a lot of research about what are the models that we could do as a small coffee shop, right? As 8 part-time employees with 1 full-time owner of the business, for us to be able to, have the employees own the business. So that led to the workers' cooperative model. So hearing about ESOPs, employee ownership trusts, really take note, guys, that we're talking about businesses here that are 50 or more employees. And even for 50, as we heard from Kevin, the administrative overhead and the costs of doing, one of those other models is quite high, quite high in terms of administratively getting those third-party other businesses to come and do evaluation of your business. So for us, as this very small business, this was never really something that we could even look at, right? We were not the right fit for any of those models. So workers' cooperatives really are flexible. And Kevin, you lined us up to have this description, right, of the pluses and minuses of what a worker cooperative is. And it's really democracy at work is the best way to think about it. That every member of the workers' cooperative, every employee that is qualified, invited, paid in, and every workers' cooperative sets those terms for themselves, but that every employee owner has one share, one vote. So they have control of the company kind of as a group. So a lot of small businesses that are workers' cooperatives, they could be in the single digit number of employees. And some of them allow employees that are not employee owners, some don't. So the way we ended up doing it at our place, and by the way, it's called Morning Bell Coffee Roasters in Ames, Iowa. If you guys want to search this up on your Instagram, or whatever, see what I'm talking about, and also go visit, go see what's happening over at Morning Bell. So when we set this up, we had to go through a lot of these questions, in the planning process, and this was me with a group of employees kind of churning through these issues, and it took some time. And my vision was that I would stay and be one of the worker owners and ideally just do less. I was kind of at a point where I was working many, many hours per week, never able to take a vacation, not able to enjoy the fruits of my wife's life as an academic, where she gets summers off and, all these perks. So I was really dreaming just about doing less, but I loved being able to continue to work in the business in some way. So as we churned through these questions, my wife got a big opportunity to move to Texas A&M University, College Station, Texas, to take a job as a professor there. So that really changed the tenor of the conversation. Instead of me being able to stay and be a worker owner, now the conversation was, the boss is quitting, I'm quitting, you guys are buying my business, right? And for the employees, you can imagine you're a part-time barista. Let's say you're a student at Iowa State, part-time barista, and your boss is telling you you're buying the business. So it was a lot of cultural change to have all those conversations and really make sure that employees understood you aren't taking the risk personally. And Heather, I think this was such a good point about ESOPs. For a lot of employee ownership curious folks, they hear, oh, how can I be the owner, right? I don't have any money. I don't want to have this risk. But for me to really make that clear to my employees that they weren't going to take any risk, this was all going to be on me, really, because we self-financed our transition. So we provided a loan to the new structure to be able to buy the business from my wife and I. So for me, workers' cooperatives, this is kind of the most optimistic model for smaller businesses. All right. And we know if you look around, you drive around Cedar Falls, right? We drive around Ames. Most of the businesses are small. The small restaurants, the places that are owned by the folks that we heard about from Dr. Leslie, the silver tsunami, and this is a real problem that a lot of those businesses, if we're going to keep them in the communities, turning a lot of those businesses into workers' cooperatives is a real possibility. So I'm a big proponent of it. And just to fill you in, since we made the transition, this was at the end of 2021. So January 1st, 2022, Morning Bell Coffee Roasters became the first workers' cooperative in Iowa. So it had never been done before. There was no legal precedent. And that was one of the big hurdles that we had in all our planning to be able to do that transition. And we really had to rely on outside help, outside legal help from outside the state. Because unfortunately at that time, Iowa CEO wasn't up and running yet. And I got to plug Iowa CEO, go to the conference. I got to go last October. It was so fantastic. If you're curious about employee ownership, this is where the employee ownership folks in Iowa are hanging out. So don't miss the opportunity to see it. Since we sold the business to our employees, they've been doing a fantastic job. The business has been holding steady, growing. I think they're, holding it down. And for many small businesses, we're not looking for growth, right? This is a business that's meant to be very steady and just keep holding its place in the community, keep providing that service to the community. The other interesting, notable thing in my experience about workers' cooperatives is they handle cash differently. So for me as an owner, right, and all owners of businesses, small businesses, we look at those revenues and the net income, the profit left at the end of the year, and we're like, that's my money, right? Pull it out, that's my profit. For workers' cooperatives, the employee owners, they see that profit as that's my insurance. I'm going to leave that money in there. That's my insurance that this place is going to keep running. And when it hits the fan, we'll be able to use that money to make payroll. So they have a very conservative approach to how they run the business financially, much more conservative than kind of traditionally run firms. And I'm still on the board. So the fact that we have a loan to them, I have quarterly meetings, I get to hear what's going on. And, Kevin, you mentioned those risks of we're giving them so much trust, right? Employee owners, they have so much trust they can either really make it amazing or flub it up in some serious ways. And I think my answer to that is for most small businesses, the goal is to just keep doing what we're doing, right? We're not looking to make big changes. And when I talk to my employee owners at Morning Bell, and we talk about other opportunities, because of course, as business people bring us opportunities all the time. So we have opportunities to buy other businesses, opportunities to expand. And the employee owners say, we're good. We don't want any more headaches. We're not looking to change or do anything different. We just want to roll steady with what we're doing. And that's just a very different attitude about business, right? Which seems both contrarian to the growth forever mindset, but really aligns with keeping a business in a community as community service, right? As service to the people running the place and as a benefit to the community. Another point, the alternatives, right? Which is really mergers and acquisitions. So there's an interesting thing happening in the ESOP world that ESOPs are very well run, right? They grow, not only are they well run, there's fantastic documentation of how they run. And we heard about this ERISA rule with the ESOPs. So many ESOPs are going away because of private equity. ESOPs are very tantalizing private equity targets. And private equity, if you guys don't know about it, read up on what's happening in our country with private equity. So basically, these are firms that can buy other businesses, and it's just private money and not always run with communities in mind or employees in mind. So that's just an interesting challenge with ESOPs. The workers' cooperatives, we don't have that problem. Everything is held by the employee owners. So I think that's probably good, but I'd love to get the first question and be able to talk more about employee ownership with you guys. I think you're muted,
You're
Leslie.
muted.
There you are.
And I have requested Leslie
Yeah.
to take over the Q&A part because she is more knowledgeable about these things. There are many questions though.
Yeah.
So Leslie, here you go.
Yes, there's a lot here. I'm going to answer one. Kelsey asked a question. If you worked for a small company for a good amount of time and knew the owners really well, how could you start a conversation about employee ownership models? Had anybody have an idea on? I mean, I have an idea on how to start it, but I'm going to plug Iowa CEO, you know, because, and then number two, what are their retirement plans? What do they plan to do with the business upon retirement? But you guys may have a softer way to go into that.
I can take a stab at it. I would love to hear what Kevin and Heather think too. But I think as employees, this feels very touchy, right? You're going to the owners of the business where you have this interesting power dynamic and the culture of you working for them. It can feel very strange to make that pitch to owners of the business. But I would say, other than that social discomfort, it's worth it. You should talk to them. And having been in the transactions where it's not with employees and on the transaction with employees, the main benefit for the owners of businesses are they get to sit on both sides of the transaction in a lot of ways, right? This is not a normal kind of combative business transaction where somebody's buying, somebody's selling, we're going to negotiate, right? This is figuring out how to support the business so it continues to exist while the people selling get what they want. So it's a very different discussion. And for me, it's just extremely optimistic. I think one thing you could do is provide them case studies, right? Get them to read about other like business owners who have done this. Because I think narratives and stories really help set the table for people to put themselves in the shoes of those business owners to even start thinking of it as an option. And Kevin and Heather, what do you guys think?
I I totally agree. Like I think it's if there's great relationships that already exist, like I think this would be something that most owners would be like incredibly enthusiastic to hear because um it can get really lonely when you're owning a business and you're feeling like I'm in this myself and I'm making all these decisions and so on and so forth. And the more you're hearing other people asking those kinds of questions, you're it's almost like a relief that other people care too. And that's what you're looking for is his care factor. So there's so many resources out there to help, so many people that are willing to share and to work with owners that are willing to consider it that I think just have the conversation, like have the conversation and connect them to the center, like has been suggested, and the center is going to be able to connect them to businesses that have already done it before, and it's exciting. It's awesome.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that ESOP companies are incredible to work with. Like they share so much information. We like to say R&D or rip off and duplicate. I mean, most of the stuff that we do has come from other companies. And I know personally our CEO, he is such an advocate for ESOPs. He has went and talked to a number of companies just about it. And so if you could ever just kind of connect with maybe other companies that are ESOPs or any of the other setups, I think they're always willing to share so much information. I've just been blown away with it. Doesn't seem competitive. It just seems like we are all kind of in it together. And I would say that's probably the biggest, if you can hear those stories. And I mean, we've had so many people on our front line that were terrible savers on their 401k, but have been able to retire maybe a little bit early or just comfortably that they wouldn't have been able to without the ESOP.
Got a question that has to do with worker cooperatives. What challenges do worker cooperatives face compared to a traditional business? So your worker cooperative coffee shop compared to your single owned coffee shop. And how do they make decisions when members disagree on important issues since it's equal ownership? Great question out there, Olivia.
It's a really great question. And, in my experience, my research on this, I really want to second what Heather said. The information sharing that's out there is amazing. And I think this is true across all the various types of employee ownership. Everybody wants to help. So in my research, we had about a year of research and work before the transaction happened, before we actually converted. So we really rubbed our noses at all the different options and didn't want to close any doors, in terms of what we could do for ourselves. And in that research, I really uncovered a lot of negative stories too. And I don't want to shy away and say that it's all daisies and roses, right? I mean, it's still business. And maybe a negative of the workers' cooperative model is that me, Heather, Kevin, Leslie, and Shahina, we're going to run a business together by committee, right? And isn't dictatorship and authoritarian management much easier for us all to just listen to Leslie? Whatever Leslie says, that's fantastic, right? And everybody goes along with it. It's much harder for the five of us to sit in a room and say, well, what are we going to do about this issue, right? What are we going to do about, we need to renew our lease, right? Like fill in the blank, whatever decisions need to be made. So I think for a lot of workers' cooperatives, that's when it hits the road, right? This is when the moment of we actually have to make some tough decisions together. And that speaks to the folks involved, right? And I think knowing Iowa and Iowans, this is a polite group that's willing to compromise, willing to civilly discuss issues that are difficult, more so than other places in the US, having lived in many places in the US. So I'm just full of optimism that if it can happen anywhere, it might start best in Iowa in that way. But I would say for the person that asked that question, research some of the stories. There's a lot of interesting Googling about why workers' cooperatives shut down, and in terms of squabbling among the employees.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Great perspectives there on what those differences are. The next question, I'm going to take a stab at answering the next question, but Heather may chime in a little bit. And it's, how does owning an ESOP share actually benefit someone who's just starting their career? Okay, so you're at the very beginning. So when you first start your career, even with an ESOP, there may be a time period where you have to work for the company before you're vested. In some cases, you don't get shares until you're vested. In other cases, you get shares, but you would not have access to those shares if you leave before a certain time. There's a lot of rules. So if that's the case, then what is the benefit? Now, from a financial side, students, the first million that you're ever going to have as an investment will be the money that gets saved for you or by you during your 20s. Okay, that will be your first million for retirement. So that ESOP, you may not have access to the share, but what the research has shown is that those people 28 to 34 who are working for an ESOP already have more wealth. They already have more wealth at that time period. So yeah, maybe when you're 22, you're going to get a competitive wage, but you may not feel it financially at that particular point. But you're going to see it from another point. Because as Heather talked about the engagement of the employees, it isn't a democracy when you're within ESOP. You still have managerial structures, but they care about the ideas you have for improving the company. And so those ideas are shared. Now, your idea may not be the one that eventually gets moved forward, but people are listening. So you have this opportunity to affect change in the organization, no matter what level you are. So you are an entry-level worker, and within your first year and a half, you will already see where you have the ability to make change. And it feels really good when you show up for work every day and your voice matters. What you have to say matters. And that is important. Kevin sees that when he talks about the structures he's put into place. Heather would see that. And Nevada's seeing that in the workers' cooperative. Your voice matters. And I talked to a young lady who was about 27 years old, and she had worked for about 3 years for a particular company before she started working for this ESOP. She didn't know it was an ESOP. When she changed, she didn't know that's what she was looking for. She could not believe the difference in the culture. And because of that, she could not think about working anyplace else. Heather has said that about her own experience. So that's why I would say, the actual benefit, research shows it's a long-term benefit. Okay, you're going to have more money at retirement. Matter of fact, the data shows you're going to have twice the amount of retirement as compared to somebody who retires, their peer who retires from a regular firm. So just right there, you're going to have twice the retirement. Heather, would you?
That's exactly what I would say. I think, even when like I said, I started when I was 22 and I just fell into an ESOP. I had no idea. My parents weren't ever part of an ESOP, nothing like that. But you're right. I would never go to a company that wasn't employee owned at some level. But when my team is looking for new employees or interns, we talk about culture 100%. It is our 2-second lean program where it fix what bugs you. No one's ever gotten in trouble for trying something that didn't work. If it bugs you, fix it. And we just really give people the ability to own it. We also talk a lot about not only owning your position, but owning the communities you live in, owning your health. And so there's all kinds of things that that just stem around, because obviously if you take care of yourself, it's going to help our benefits and the cost of our benefits. And so we just get to talk to our employees at a whole different level, where a lot of that in a traditional company would be kind of behind closed doors. But we openly talk about, you know, different costs and things. So I would say, you know, we really talk about it. At the end of the day, it's a retirement, and it's great. And but throughout your career, it goes straight to that culture piece. We hear it all the time. You know, people just seem different when they, you know, like people are different when we come into your building, or everyone's smiling. Like, you know, obviously we all have bad days. Don't get me wrong, but for the most part, we're really proud of who we are and where we work.
Hey, I've got another question. I'm going to ask it to two different people, both for Kevin as well as Nadav. Would it be easier to start the company as an employee-owned trust, or to transition into it later? And Nadav, the same question for you. Would it be easier to start the company as a worker cooperative or go through a transition? So Kevin?
Uh, I think the startup of a company oftentimes requires capital, and I don't know that there's a lot of capital tools that are out there currently that would make it easy to start a brand new business with because in the structure of an EOT, when you go get a loan to buy out the owner, you're trying to get loans where there's no personal guarantors so that the employee owners aren't on the hook if things go south. And so if you're starting a company from scratch and there's risks associated with that, it might be a little challenging to start it that way. And way easier to make the transition. There are investment people that will provide investment with no personal guarantors, and there's more and more of them showing up because of how valuable employee ownership is to communities and to employees and to just the world in general for all the good that it brings. But definitely harder to to start one in that manner.
Okay. Nadav?
So Kevin, you hit on a really important point about workers' cooperatives too, that it's very tough to get credit because there is no personal guarantors. When nobody owns the shares in some way, like the shares are in trust that are executed by the worker owners, right? Because nobody is an owner in the way that they will sign the loan agreement, right? So it's a big kind of glaring hole right now in terms of the financial services that a lot of employee-owned smaller firms can get. So very good of you to shine a light on that. My own personal thought on this, you know, as an entrepreneur that has started businesses, I think there's still room for people to start businesses not using this ownership structure, and that these ownership structures really work best for an existing business, to kind of second also what Kevin said. So I think, you know, when an entrepreneur takes risk, builds a business, you know, there's a lot of risk there. We don't see employee ownership as a startup as much. It's happened. I know of a bakery up in Minneapolis that started as a workers cooperative, but it's a tougher proposition, right? In my mind, workers cooperative is great when everything's humming along, right? The business exists, everybody knows what they're doing, when they're supposed to show up. But when we're building the thing, it's actually quite more complicated, I imagine, to do that by committee.
Yeah. Okay. Luke asked a good question, and I will start. I will attempt to answer this question because I don't know that any of us here have gone through the particular experience, and that is what typically initiates the process of transitioning into an ESOP company. So, you know, at some point, the owner of a company, and oftentimes it's because, oh, I'm ready to retire. I'm ready to do something else. What am I going to do with this company right now? And a lot of the people who transition into an ESOP, they see what happens when they sell to an outside organization. The company may disappear in the community, and the employees won't be employed any longer. And they have started a company that they feel good about, they're very proud of. And so they're thinking, can I keep it here? And when you talk to people who've gone through that process, that's often what you hear. You hear they want to keep it in the community, they believe in their people, they want to give their people a company that they can feel part of. Okay, but then how do they start it? You do have to worry about financing. So that's going to be one. And then one of the first steps that gets initiated is evaluation, because you need to have your company evaluated so you can figure out how much money the bank is willing to loan the ESOP, because they're loaning the money to the ESOP because then the ESOP's paying off that original owner, and then they're owning the business. So it often starts because that business owner has initiated a valuation of some sort, and they have started talking to banks about what money might be available. But there's organizations out there, there's CPAs that you get involved, there are organizations that help with that transition, but those are common things that we see that get them started on that transition. I know when Jeff bought ESP, because in this, for the accountants in the room, if we have any student accountants in the room, he was, I don't know if he had made partner at an accounting firm, but his partner as an accounting firm, and then he is auditing this company, and he says, okay, it's for sale, I'm going to buy it. And he's audited so many companies that are employee owned, and he sees how good they are. He's saying, this is what I want to do. It's going to be a better company. He got into it a little different, because then he did buy it and then transitioned over. But in his particular case, because he was an accountant, he probably knew what the value of the company was.
I always say we were unique. We were actually our four top people for a long time were all CPAs. So I always say we were ran very, very well.
Yeah, very, very efficiently. So hopefully that answers your question about how things start. And if we have finance students in the room, we have had finance students do valuations of small businesses. So maybe do a valuation of the roaster, the coffee shop, because they typically can't afford to have the valuation done. So we do some things at low or no cost available for those size companies. For larger companies, you're going to have to get somebody, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money on it. But some of those initial costs in the state of Iowa for ESOPs, the state provides some money. But it is after you've gone through it, you can be paid back for the investment that you made there. So, um, okay, maybe for you, Heather, what are some of the main challenges for new workers when starting their career in an ESOP firm? What would you say their main challenges would be?
I think it kind of depends where they come from, like what kind of organization they came from before. I think the hardest thing is changing the thought process of the us versus them. A lot of times I hear, well, they're making these decisions, and in ESOP, you are the they. And so you don't get to just point out problems, you got to solve them too. We'll be there to support you, we'll help you, but I would say that's probably the hardest thing. You aren't just a number, and you can't just hide and kind of just do a job and then leave. We want you to be 100% engaged in what we're doing. So that's probably the hardest thing. The other part of that question is, why would companies want to sell to an ESOP? I think Kevin did a really good job at explaining that, because a lot of times if a private equity comes in and purchases the company, they really don't have that much of a, I guess they're probably more willing to sell that company again or shut it down, close it out. Where an ESOP company, I think, the culture is such a big deal to us. And I think Leslie even mentioned the difference between how many times an ESOP company will lay off compared to a traditional company. And so we have just purchased a lot of family-owned companies, and I think they love the idea of their families being able to participate in what, either they could have sold and taken all the risk of being an owner, or they could sell to us and their family members still get to be an owner, but not at the same risk level and probably not at the same stress. I've never been an owner of a true CEO of a company, so I don't know what that stress would feel like. Kevin and would probably have a better idea on that, but
Yeah.
but that's what I.
There was a question, and I've lost it in my list over here, about whether or not ESOP or employee ownership is a good option for a family business. And Heather did talk some about that. And it can be a good option for a family business. A business that's been in the family a long time, eventually they may not want to be part of that business anymore. Not all the kids want to continue to work for XYZ company. And so then what options do you have? And because many of these individuals are family-owned businesses, they've been in the community a long time, they believe in their community. They believe in their employees. They don't want something negative to happen to their community. And so that's why ESOP or an EOT for these larger firms become a possibility that keeps the business in the community. And really, what you see is wealth passing from the owner into the hands of the people who are actually helping build that business. So you see that wealth transaction take place, and people who built that business, they can feel really good about that. They believed in their employees.
Well,
Got a question out here. What's the success rate once a firm starts an ESOP transaction? And I have no idea. I can't answer that question. But we might be able to get an answer to that from people who work at the Iowa CEO, because they're looking at that. And there may be data about that through the Rutgers Institute for Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing.
so we're nearing the time, but if you want to answer a few questions here, or you could write also. Like there was a question that Leslie, you wanted to answer by Gavin Mills. What is the difference between ESOP and union?
Oh, yeah, the difference between I think Nadav actually showed a good example of this. So unions do work very hard to protect the worker rights. Okay, that's what unions have done. Unions have increased wages for people. They've done a lot of things, but oftentimes it is a competitive structure, and it ends up being us against them. Okay, there are ESOPs that are unionized, but there may be rules that do not allow the union people to actually own those shares. I've heard about that. So a union is very different than an ESOP. An ESOP is to some extent, you might want to think about it as a retirement plan to some extent. It's a profit sharing plan for the people who are working in the business, but it's not, this one group fighting for certain things against another group, which is often disappointingly what happens, especially with unions in the United States. You get a little less of that when you look in different countries, but it does tend to be more combative in the United States. So that kind of tells you. There's another, Miles asked a question, what impact have you seen worker ownership have on employee morale or turnover? Okay, those two things have come up. When we look at volunteer turnover, it decreases in an employee-owned firm. People stay longer with an employee-owned firm. So that is one thing that we see, and it's quite evident. Now, the other part of that I've already forgotten, and I lost the question. I should have said it out loud. Okay, somebody help me. I said it was
Morale.
morale. Yes, morale. That was also brought up on the engagement. Um, in employee-owned firms, when they're doing engagement assessment, that engagement within an employee-owned firm is much higher than an engagement in a non-employee-owned firm. So, people, they work smarter, they care more, and they stay with the company longer. Those are things that our research has absolutely shown.
There are a few other questions. I think many of those have been they were towards the beginning, and many of these questions have been answered. So Jake asked, do you have a certain preference about which ESOP group is the best? Do you want to answer it, or do you think our presentations took care of?
Yeah, Jake, we gave kind of a high level. There's three, we talked about three different models for employee ownership. And best is really determined by the unique characteristics of the organization. So with Kevin's business, it may not have been large enough, number one, to move in the direction of an ESOP. That could have been part of it, but it's also for Kevin and the owner and his brothers, the ownership at a time, they really wanted to focus on that employee ownership, and there were downsides for them to go the ESOP route. So best is really going to be determined by the unique characteristics of a particular business.
So then the next question is, what are some of the main benefits of ESOPs for employees? I think we talked about this a lot, so I will skip that. Okay, Heather is answering that, but yes, go ahead. But then there is another question. Is there a negative impact for workplace?
I would say that there's not a negative impact that is the result of that business model. But there can be negative impacts because you can still have bad managers. It does not matter the type of ownership model that you have, there can still be bad managers. And you hope if you're managed well, you can get people out of it. But there's not a negative impact just because of that particular business model. I don't know if there's other people here that would disagree with that.
Okay, so I think Heather is typing on this question, but there is this, what were the hardest parts of setting up your worker cooperative? Did we talk about that already, right? Did we? And then the last question is, how does owning an ESOP share actually benefit someone who is just starting their career?
Yeah, and I talked about that one.
Yeah,
I
we
did
talked
answer
about
that
that.
one out loud.
All right, so is this the last question we have? You want to say something or?
The hardest parts, what was the hardest part for setting up that worker cooperative?
You know, for us, it was a little unique that it didn't exist before, right? So that lack of precedent was kind of hard. There is a legal process to create a workers' cooperative, and each transaction has to be really customized. So I think the bar is much lower than it would be for, let's say, creating an ESOP or an employee ownership trust, but it's still a fairly high bar. And in my experience, most of the people who do it, you're talking about probably a six-figure amount of money, you know, like $10,000 minimum, just in legal fees to do that kind of transition. So for a lot of really small businesses, you're right, that's a hurdle that maybe has to be financed together in with a transaction. But yeah, it can be a little complicated, but where there's a will, there's a way, right? And I think the driving of a lot of this, and I think you're hearing this from the panelists, from Leslie, it's driven by owners, right? This is the whole process is always driven by owners who have a passion for their communities, want their businesses to keep existing. If we didn't have the passion to do it as owners, you wouldn't see these happening. And you have thousands, right? Like all over the US. It's a huge movement towards employee ownership. So I'm very optimistic.
That is awesome. So is there any concluding thing you want to say, each of you? I think there's still many attendees there. So they're still here. It looks like they want to hear from you.
Yeah.
So just in a sentence, some concluding remarks, please. My screen, I mean, we'll go by the order. So go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah.
Or maybe Leslie can go last this
I'll
time.
go last. Heather, why don't
Okay.
you start? Yeah, any
Yeah.
concluding remarks?
I don't think so, but if anybody, I'm absolutely, I know everybody in my company is open to have conversations. So if anybody has, any additional questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to, answer those, or, if you wanted to come over for a tour, we'd love to host you as well.
Kevin.
Just the person that asked the question, what do I do if I've got, you know, the good relationships in a company, and how do you approach this? Like, just in general, I'd love to just say everybody ask questions about this wherever you work. Like, there just needs to be more conversation. The more conversation that happens, the more engagement there's going to be, and that's really what this is all about. Is let's get more people thinking for themselves, and being engaged and participating in the business and how it operates.
Nadav.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody again for being here. And I think my last word, you know, for all the students that are here, you know, I think we don't teach this, right? We didn't talk about this too much, but even at Rutgers and the places in the US academically that are focused on this in a research sense, there's a lot of education, a lot of work that needs to be done for people to know more about this. And if you're curious about this and you were curious enough to join us today, right, to hear more about this, if that curiosity leads you, there's amazing resources, books. You know, the folks at Iowa CEO can help in that direction. But, you know, just know there are opportunities here. So we need the younger folks to come in and work in these firms and understand these issues. So we're just excited for your curiosity and excited that you'll take up the mantle and keep pushing this forward.
And finally, since most of the students here are probably from the state of Iowa, there's a little under 200 ESOPs in the state of Iowa. Okay, so that means there's a lot of opportunity available to you, and you can consider that. And I will tell you, companies such as Heather's company, they very proudly say employee owned. That's part of who they are. And so you can find out about that as you're starting to do your job search and look at what opportunities are available to you. Those are possibilities. Now, employee-owned trust, there's not as many of them. Kevin tells me there's about 60 now in the nation, you know, about 60. And worker cooperatives, those are small and new. But ESOPs can employ as many as 250,000 people. What you may not know, if you're familiar with Publix as a grocery store, they employ about 250,000 people and they are 100% employee owned. So it's from small firms to huge firms that are out there. So there's a lot of opportunity. So ask questions as you're going through your job search.
All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions. And well, I'm very surprised actually. I've been doing this for a long time, and looks like they're still at their 93 students and staff. Still looks like they want to hear from you. But sadly, our time is up, and I would like to thank you, all the panelists, and I'm sure our attendees are also with me, that for giving up your time to share about this topic. And special thanks to Leslie to bringing this to my attention. And it has been great, actually. And I think I'm sure they benefited, our students benefited from all these talks. And I'm sure that through me or Leslie, they would like to reach out to you. And I hope that will be okay with all of you.
Mhm. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right. We'll wait a bit.
If you guys are all set, I'm gonna step out. You guys can take your well-earned group picture. So you don't have a black square with my name on it for that. And then Anton, if the recording was set to the cloud, Anton should be able to see that and get that to you soon.
Okay.
Not sure exactly what soon means for his timeline, but it shouldn't be that hard. He can download it and send it to you. So,
All
do you have
right.
any other questions for me?
I think I'm okay.
Awesome.
Anyone else?
Yeah, there was a question, Shahina, from somebody about whether or not the recording would be available for
Yeah,
students
I
to
answered
see.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Okay.
answered that as soon as Anton sends me that, I will share with everybody, actually.
Okay.
Perfect. And I'll message him just to let him know that you're expecting that. I'm sure he already knows that, but just to double check, cover our bases, et cetera, et cetera. So, perfect.
So there is one last question. Oh, Andre said that thank you all the panelists, and that was amazing. Andre's probably next a few doors down. He's an economics faculty.
Yeah.
All
All
right,
right.
have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I Trey.
Thank you, Trey. Thank
Yeah.
you for your help.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys doing this. I hope that the students find it inspirational because your voices about how I mean, there's just an emotional connection to what you're doing and to your work. And not many people feel that way about their work. And I think students want to feel that way about their work. So it was really, to me, I found it very uplifting for sure. So thank you very much.
All
Thanks
right.
for having us.
So, yeah, go ahead. Hang on 1 second. If you guys can take the screenshot, you are welcome to, but I'll give it a try.
Okay, give it a try.
All right. Everybody smile. Looks like it did.
All right. Yay.
I'll
That'll be
share
the
that.
cover.
Thank you very much, everybody, again,
Yeah.
and hopefully we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys. Have a
Bye-bye.
you
great
guys.
time.
Enjoy New York, Kevin.
Thanks.
Bye.
See
Bye-bye.
y'all.